Securing Your Network with Firewall Technologies, which is presented by Ray Scites, owner of K&L Consulting Services, a small business information technology partner. Ray has over 20 years of experience and has acquired multiple career and education certificates from Microsoft, Cisco, CompTIA, MIT, and others. His expertise encompasses IP networking, Windows Server and virtualization technologies, as well as application and web development. Ray's integrity and hard work and passion for helping small businesses solve technology problems have earned him a reputation as a trusted and knowledgeable professional. Currently, he is assisting several businesses with migrations to Microsoft Windows Server 2019, Azure Cloud Services, and building custom .NET Core job tracking web application. We're pleased to have Ray here with us today to discuss where firewall technology is right now, where it's headed, and where it still leaves us vulnerable. Please welcome Ray Scites.
Hello, I hope you guys are all having a great day. These conferences are always a lot of fun. This is something, network security is something that I'm very excited about and passionate about. So I'm enjoying the opportunity to come in today and talk about it. Security is hard. A professor at MIT said it like this: security is a negative goal. Now, I first heard this, it didn't really click with me, but I really started thinking about it, and it transformed the way I thought about security. What we're used to are positive goals. We're used to working toward achieving an objective. We want to make something work, because life is great when we make something work. We want to give our company internet access. We want to give our servers, maybe FTP access from the outside world. Security is a matter of a negative goal, because we want to prevent things from working. We want to figure out, how are these bad actors going to attack us, and how can we block them from doing that? Fortunately, the National Institute of Standards and Technology provides a cybersecurity framework for us. It's broken down into 5 individual pieces: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. These frameworks are really important because they help us develop policies for our company that can protect us in cases of lawsuits and arbitration. In fact, the newly passed Ohio Data Protection Act provides a safe harbor for breach lawsuits for businesses that implement and maintain cybersecurity programs that meet certain industry standards. So if your company has some internal policy that follows this standard, it helps protect you in case one of your customers or somebody else were to sue you if your data is breached or their data is breached, because we hold a lot of customer data, accounting data. What I feel is the most important part, and probably the most overlooked part of this framework, is the identify piece. Because we need to identify 3 major areas. We need to do asset management. It's very important to figure out what we have in our network, what all of the devices are, and then move on to the business needs and figure out what devices need what access, who needs access to what piece needs access to where. And then we have to assess the risks. We have to look at, how are our devices vulnerable? Where are these risks possibly coming from? Here's a typical small business network. This is something that usually when I go to a small business, this is how we see it configured. They have a server and a router and a switch, maybe an access point, smartphones, tablets, PCs, maybe a DVR security camera system. So who can tell me where inside this particular diagram, where are our threats? Are they on the internet? Are they internally? Which device on here is a potential threat for us?
I would say maybe most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. If not all of them, right? So, smartphones, Android, very exciting stuff. And then we assess the business needs. So we know what encompasses our network, what our devices are. And we want to sit down and figure out what resources each device needs. Each device is going to need its own set of resources. And it's important that we identify all of these pieces because that builds a map for us later when we go to configure our firewalls, our security technology. Because we want to allow these things to work. That's our positive goal. We want to allow the file shares, the applications, the printing, FTP, but we want to block everything else. So when we assess risks, we can look at common threats, phishing and spear phishing, downloads, email attachments, password stuffing, brute force, hardware and software vulnerabilities. So phishing attacks, hackers have realized that the easiest way to compromise a user's credentials is to ask for them, right? So they send out an email, it's got a link, they want you to click on it, the IRS is going to come arrest you if you don't put your credentials in, go to this website, that website. And people do this, they fall for this all the time. I get calls, Ray, hey, I put my credentials into this site, it still won't let me download this weird invoice that a vendor sent me. Great, okay. So one of the ways that we can block this kind of stuff with firewall technology is content filtering. But we'll get into that one here in a minute. Once they've collected and they've harvested this information through breaches or through phishing, they use techniques called password stuffing. These are giant lists that are out on the internet, not the dark web, not some secret place on the internet. They're just out on the internet. This screenshot is a GitHub repository that I found in Google. It was like the second line down. There's 100,000 passwords available on this list that have come from breaches, phishing, password harvesting. Since brute force attacks are so difficult, the hackers, the bad actors, have found that they can use these lists and push them against equipment, and they're able to log into the equipment and hack the equipment much, much faster. And downloads. This comes through email. Ransomware, typically. I think we've all seen these kind of things. But it's not dead. It's becoming far more targeted. And these are through the phishing attempts. They're through the breaches. They're through business email compromise. And that's a huge one this past year, business email compromise. I've got a customer who was a sales guy, and they're sending information back and forth with one of their customers, and they're negotiating a sale. It was a fairly large sale. It was a $75,000 piece of equipment. They decided, well, this is our price, this is delivery, everything's great. The customer sent an email to his customer, and here's the ACH information. Here's the wire transfer information for you to go ahead and make your deposit or payment. 5 minutes later, another email shows up at his customer in the middle of the email chain with the signatures, with the to, with the from. And it says, hey, there's a problem with this wire transfer information. Please send it to this account instead. And I looked at that and I'm like, well, that's amazing and absolutely frightening because it's so believable. It's right there in the middle of the chain and it's targeted. My wife used to work in the mortgage industry, and she let me know that this is rampant in that industry as well. Homeowners, people looking to buy homes, I guess, are getting these compromises when they're talking about sending in their deposits and so on. The last piece is hardware and software vulnerabilities. It's a common statistic that for every 1,000 lines of code, there's a bug in the code. Now, this isn't like beta software. This is after it's gone through its quality assurance. This is after teams of people have looked at it and made sure, hey, this software is solid, it's secure. There's still a bug for every 1,000 lines of code. To put that in perspective, Windows XP had 40 million lines of code. Windows 10 has roughly 50 to 60 million lines of code. The Linux kernel, which a lot of the equipment on people's networks run on the Linux kernel, has 15 million lines of code. So there's that many bugs that you can pretty much anticipate on all of your equipment. The United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team provides a common vulnerabilities and exposures website that we can look at that will actually tell us all of the known vulnerabilities for each device, software, and so on. And it's staggering. This screenshot here, I punched in Netgear. So I just wanted to see what would pop up. I got 95 hits off of Netgear. And it's not Netgear. I mean, it's every manufacturer. There's lots of codes and lots of bugs out there. So it's important, probably very important, to update our equipment, all of our equipment, not just our operating systems. You know, it's not enough to say, okay, we've run our Windows updates. We need to keep our firewalls updated, our switches updated. Every piece of, or every device on the network really needs to stay updated as these vulnerabilities are discovered. So here's a few headlines that I downloaded just to kind of support the fact that the gentleman back there, you know, every device is a threat, and it's true. Android malware has infected 45,000 devices, right? So we've got open Wi-Fi, maybe somebody's kids got their Android tablet, they're playing some game they've downloaded, they're on your network. How do you know that Android tablet's not running a brute force attack against your server? You don't. Android actually has a real problem with this at the moment. Cyber attacks launched on 150,000 printers worldwide. Malware infects 500,000 routers. Target hackers broke in via HVAC company. So this one really caught my attention. The big Target hack that happened a few years ago, they traced it down. And what happened is an HVAC company, a third-party vendor that they dealt with, was compromised. And the equipment that they used was compromised. So these hackers were able to come in through this third-party hack and install firmware on their POS systems, and then copy all of the credit card information that was running through the network. But you don't hear about the HVAC company. Even this headline doesn't say, hey, this HVAC company, you know, was compromised. It's Target. Target was compromised. So that's something to think about with all the different devices that are on your network. Lots of vulnerabilities there. One of the most common questions I get asked when a customer gets hit with ransomware or they see one of these phishing attempts is just why? Why do hackers do this? It's for the money. You know, the FBI provides an internet crime report every year, and this past year, you know, they reported $2.71 billion in losses. That's a lot. So that's $2.1 billion or $2.71 billion in the U.S., U.S. citizens, U.S. businesses, and that money is, you know, lost, transferred to hackers. The hackers are making a ton of money doing this kind of stuff. The city of Bedford, New York, most recently was compromised over a weekend. 100+ machines were infected with ransomware, and it encrypted all their data. Fortunately, it was the weekend, and 2/3 of their machines were shut down. They decided that the best route to go was to first talk to the hackers. And the hackers wanted $5 million to restore their systems. So they went back and said, okay, well, how about we negotiate? How about we look at some typical payouts? They talked to their insurance company, figure out, okay, well, what can we pay? And they offered them $400,000 to unencrypt the systems. And the hackers turned it down. Now think about that for a second. They're like, no, I don't need $500,000. It's okay. It's crazy when you think about it that the hackers are doing well enough. And then, yeah, I don't need $500,000. I wish I could say that. So the next part of our framework is to protect. And this kind of gets us into the meat of the firewall technology. But there's a couple of different aspects of the protection. We talk about awareness and training. Train the employees. Don't click on this, don't click on that. Though training is becoming difficult. We used to always say, don't click on an email, don't open an attachment if it doesn't come from somebody you trust. Well, with these business email compromises, a lot of these things are coming from people we trust. So it's scary, and it makes training a little bit more difficult. Data security and access controls. These are physical access controls. These are company policies, equipment use policies, separation agreements, those kind of things. Protective technologies, and that's what we're talking about today with the firewalls. And then maintenance as far as updating, update. And updating is really very, very, very important. So we get into firewalls. There's really three main categories of firewall technology. You have the basic features, the address translation, the port blocking, and the port forwarding. Pretty much any firewall, that $30 Netgear that I run into at small businesses sometimes, or the one that Time Warner, the ISPs dropped off, has this kind of technology. It's extremely vulnerable, but it's free. That's what they give them. The next area is firewalls with enhanced features. So VLANs, port translation, stateful inspection, QoS. Most important on this, stateful inspection. That's a big one. It's where a firewall reads the packet and verifies that each person in that conversation is having the same conversation. Without stateful inspection, a basic firewall is just going to say, okay, well, this person talked to this person, and I don't know if that's a response or not, but it's on the same port, so I'm just going to pass it right on through. And that's what makes some of these basic firewalls very vulnerable. And advanced features, this is kind of where firewall technology is going. This is where we add that extra level, and it's unfortunately a little bit more expensive. Content filtering, gateway antivirus. So those phishing attempts that come in, a lot of those are click this link, it's going to go out to this website. Content filtering would prevent that. Some of these attachments that are coming in via email, a lot of those actually go out to malicious websites after you launch the attachment, download the payload, and then launch it. That's how they get around virus protection. So content filtering, once again, can protect that. Gateway antivirus, I think we talked about that one. SSL decryption, this is kind of a new one because SSL certificates and SSL is becoming very common. Almost every website has to be SSL now. So SSL decryption is a piece that runs on the firewall. It decrypts the traffic from your clients to the servers in between, and it's able to open those encrypted packets up and do the content filtering, the antivirus, and scan those packets. It's kind of an ethical nightmare, really, on the SSL decryption. It's a little questionable. But it does a great job, and really there's no no other way around that. If you want to do content filtering and gateway antivirus, you've got to be able to decrypt these SSL communications. Intrusion detection, deep packet inspection. So deep packet inspection goes a step more than stateful inspection. It's going to look at not only the communication to make sure each person in the conversation is having the same conversation, it's going to look at, is it an appropriate conversation? Is there other types of payloads in this conversation that shouldn't be there? So it's a good technology to have. Here's our network with a little bit better design, one we talked about earlier. And we've moved our security cameras, we've moved our access point to the other side of the firewall. So we've segmented these devices out so that we don't have to worry about these Android devices hacking our servers, our PCs or codecs or whatever. And it's a lot better. And if we've spent a little bit more money on firewall, we can add the intrusion detection, the content filtering piece, maybe the gateway antivirus. So when you talk about the components of a firewall, so a basic firewall configuration is made of 4 components: address object services, NAT policies, and access rules. These are called different things in different manufacturers. pfSense calls them one thing, Ubiquiti calls them one thing, SonicWall calls them one thing. I kind of like what SonicWall calls them. So that's where we'll go off of terminology-wise here. But I'll try to mention what other vendors call them as well. So an address object defines a device, a PC, a server. It's typically an IP address or an IP address range. So when we get into configuring rules, we want to know the who is talking to who. It's through creating an address object. One of the reasons we want to create these address objects is because they simplify management. If I've got a bunch of rules on my firewall and some device, maybe a server, changes its IP address, I can go and change the address object instead of changing 50 rules. It also makes it a lot easier when I'm looking at the rules, because server is a lot easier to understand than 192.168.1.20. And if you've got a bunch of different rules and a bunch of different devices, it's a lot of IP addresses to try and figure out. So the next piece is services. These define the applications, the application ports, HTTP, HTTPS. They are port aliases, pfSense calls them, port groups is what Ubiquiti calls them. A lot of the common ports are built into firewalls already. They give you a cool little drop-down list. It says HTTP, HTTPS, SMT, all of those things. NAT policies are pretty much called the same thing. Every manufacturer calls NAT policies. Well, NAT policies is network address translation. There's a limited number of IP addresses available on the internet, but businesses have thousands of pieces of equipment, some more, some less. And a typical business, the ISP is going to provide you with 1 to 5 IP addresses. So we do a network address translation that's going to convert one of those IP addresses to the dozens of computers inside your network. So when we talk about allowing things in, we have to create a NAT policy to connect those devices coming in from one IP address to another. And then the last piece is the access rules, and these are just doors. They consist of the who and the what and the where. So you kind of put those together. We've got an address object. This device is allowed to talk through this service to this device. Now, a common gotcha when configuring firewalls is that not all firewalls process these things in the same order So it's important to figure out what your device does. SonicWall happens to process an access rule before a NAT policy. Ubiquity does NAT policies before access rules. If you get these backward, you can beat your head against a wall for a long time trying to figure out, well, how come this isn't working? I'm specifically saying this is allowed to talk to that. Well, that's not that anymore. It's something else because things went in different order. A lot of times I hear, hey, Ray, I've moved all of my stuff to the cloud. It's, you know, I don't need any of this security. The cloud's great. It's taking care of me. And the cloud is good. Don't get me wrong there. But something to remember, that the cloud does offload all of the functionality, but none of the liability. Most recently, a customer of mine who has an online store, they hosted the store through Volusion. Well, Volusion is a cloud provider for online stores, and they were recently compromised with a credit card skimming attack. So all of the customers that are buying from my customer, they're entering their credit card information into Volusion, and this credit card information is going off to these hackers. It took about 2 weeks for Volusion or somebody to discover it and shut it down. So then there's this big question of, okay, Volusion's at fault, obviously, but is my customer at risk? Where's the liability lie there? Because now they have to go tell their customers, hey, your credit card information was compromised. And their customers aren't really going to care that it happened at Volusion. They're just going to care, hey, I bought something from this company, and now my credit card information's out there. Another really, really popular one is Capital One. Capital One was just compromised, and tens of thousands of people's social security numbers and private information was compromised, and they found out that the compromise happened because of an Azure firewall was incorrectly configured. No one really says Azure was compromised. Microsoft's not taking any responsibility for that. Technically, it's really not Microsoft's responsibility, because even if your stuff's in the cloud, you still need to secure it. It's still on you. It's your liability to secure that. So last piece I just want to touch on is the detection. So some firewalls offer intrusion detection, which essentially looks for weird conversations, weird things that are happening in your network. And it lets you know. And this is critical because a lot of companies, we have locks on our doors, right? But yet we still have security cameras. We have alarm systems. So we have those because we want to be notified the second someone breaks our lock. We want to know about it. So detection and intrusion detection, monitoring, it's very critical. And firewalls aren't just a perimeter defense. They actually haven't been for a long time. The whole theory of perimeter defense just doesn't work in today's environment because all the devices inside our network are just as vulnerable. They're threats, just like things outside of our network. So firewalls, are available through certain endpoint antivirus programs. This is actually a screen capture from an ESET security management console. And we can see a couple of cool things about this screen capture. One, it's doing application firewall. It's actually scanning the traffic that's going through to make sure it's the correct traffic. And it's able to pick up attacks that the typical firewall just kind of passed right on through. The other cool thing about this is that it notified. It sent me the messages and said, "Hey, this is going on." So you can immediately respond and lock things down if you need to. All right. Did anybody have any questions? Yes?
My cardinal rule has always been to disable universal plug and play.
Yeah. I think you should lock down anything that provides a vulnerability.
I've just yet to encounter any scenario where I thought it was a good idea to leave that one.
No. Yeah, being able to remotely configure your devices, no, that's really scary. Yeah.
So we recently underwent an automation system upgrade that requires our computers to run as local administrators, which is kind of freaking us out.
Yeah.
Do you have any strategies to maybe mitigate the risks associated with that? That isn't maybe just switching automation systems? That's all right.
Well, so the biggest strategy with that is to try to segregate traffic, right? So yeah, they're running as local administrators. I've seen automation systems that require a set username and password as well, and it's like 3 characters, right? That's the username and the password is 3 characters, which is frightening. So they want me to configure this system, put 3-character username and passwords on it, and make that a local administrator. There's no security there at all. I mean, it's ridiculous. So the only thing you can do is take all those other devices that could possibly cause harm and segregate them off. That's where firewalls, VLANs, I mean, that's really all you can do. You can look at what ports need to be open to those devices and shut everything else down. You can do it with the Windows firewall, you can do it with third-party firewalls, you can do it with hardware firewalls and VLANs. But yeah, no, it's just not secure. Yeah?
So we recently did a switch to an automation system that required local administrator and don't have an antivirus solution.
Mm-hmm.
It slows it down. It's a thing.
Yeah. I hate.
And then they said, oh, and it can do all these cool things if you let it interface with the internet. Remote access.
Yeah, that's another thing too. If it doesn't need to be on the internet, let's get it off the internet. Don't let it talk to the internet at all. There are other ways to get around that. But yeah, unfortunately, and I see that so often, it's just I don't have any good advice other than using a firewall and locking down everything that can possibly touch it. A lot of these automation systems, they don't have to be on the same network as your PCs, right? They can be on their own network. They can be completely physically locked off with just a couple of ports back and forth. If you can avoid the internet, absolutely do it. You can't always avoid the internet. Sometimes you have users on these systems that, I need to surf the web. I got to check the Facebook account so I can do this and that, and talk and whatever. And in that scenario, there are other things you can do. You can set up a terminal server somewhere, remote access somewhere, so that we allow just a VNC connection maybe from that system over to this system, and then this system can go talk to the rest of the internet. Anybody else? Okay. I've got. Get this going here. I've got a cool little demo. There we go. Okay. So I was recently working on a system and wanted to verify some IP addresses. So I punched in an IP address for a specific piece of equipment. This was a piece of equipment that a lot of people have in the broadcast chain. It's a very, very common piece of equipment. I'm not going to call out what the equipment was. But when I punched in the IP address, this cool little prompt came up. We've all seen this little prompt. It's from basic authentication. So I kind of forgot the password right off the top of my head, right? So, some default passwords and this and that. And then I noticed after a minute, hey, this thing's not preventing me from talking to it, right? So then I'm just furiously, hey, okay, how many times can I hit this thing before it says no? Wait a minute, it's not saying no. And it never said no. So I thought, well, I can only type so fast. Wouldn't it be kind of cool if I could do what these hackers are doing? And I could write a little tiny program that would just try every possible password combination. How long would that really take on this device? So I did. It took me about 2 hours. I wrote a simple algorithm that just runs through every character. A, B, ABC, so on and so forth. It's a standard brute force attack. But I was just curious, they talk about, passwords and security and all this wonderful stuff. So I want to see, how fast could we brute force something like admin? So I ran it, and on my laptop, it takes 1.83 seconds to brute force the admin password. I was able to run 61,000 attempts. Well, what if we used a much harder password? How long would that take? Well, it turns out it actually took quite a while doing the standard brute force. So once the password got over 6 or 7 characters, I think the word password took about 8 hours for it to crack. So an 8-character password took me about 8 hours to crack it. So then I implemented stuffing based on that GitHub repository I showed earlier. So I said, I'm just going to download one of these common password lists and we'll try this. How long does it take to run this against that? And a password, a password like that, it's got our complexity, it's got our length. I've actually had customers use this password. It took 0.061 seconds. So here's something really interesting about this brute force attack that, like I said, I literally wrote in 2 hours. It runs on .NET Core. Now, .NET Core is operating system agnostic, right? So I can run this on an Android device. I can run it on a Linux device. I can run it on any of those platforms. And this particular thing's like 100K, right? So if I can compromise a piece of equipment and I can have it running this, I can run it against your server all day long. You'd never know. Like how many times, could I attempt to compromise your server before you find out? And we're seeing that these hackers are sometimes in these networks for days, weeks, years. I just read an article before I came here about a hacker that was discovered. That's probably a robocall. It should not have gone off. Sorry about that. So, we can compromise one piece of equipment. We can compromise the rest. And it goes back to everything's a threat. Everything really should be segmented. And if I can hack admin in a few seconds doing a brute force attack, what about the account that you guys had to set up on your automation systems? That 3-character, do I even need an Android device to brute force that? I don't. I could do it off of my watch or any other device that comes into the network. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
That's kind of a weird question. Why is it all of a sudden radio stations and TV stations are starting to be targeted by hackers? Because I've heard maybe 4 reports in the last few weeks that stations are going to be attacked. Specifically ransomware.
I think anywhere there's a little bit of money, it's worth going after for these hackers. And it
Never worked in radio if they think there's money.
yeah, well, it may be that we're seeing these attacks being more successful now than the fact that we're actually seeing more of them. Because we did, I think a few years ago, we did a great job of training people, hey, don't open an email if it comes from somebody you don't know. Don't open this attachment, you know. But now, you know, these emails are coming in and they're coming from people you know. They've got their signature on it. You know, it's part of a conversation that you were having because of these email compromises. The FBI, during their 2018 crime report, actually listed the business email compromise as the biggest threat that we currently have to cybersecurity. Yeah.
I mean, just kind of sounding off what he said. I mean, ransomware is pretty rampant, regardless of where you look. I do consulting for a number of small businesses, and there's been a fair share of ransomware there, but they don't have the communication channel that we do. So I think it may be a little bit of an echo chamber where you see one thing happen and then you notice the trend the more it happens. So, I mean, being more mindful of it, you're going to notice it.
Yeah, I absolutely. Yeah, and I agree. Yeah, I think a lot of people aren't really going to say they were compromised either. You know, it kind of makes you wonder. We look at the $2.7 billion that the FBI reported on last year. How many people didn't report their losses or didn't calculate their losses for that? I mean, even companies that had good backup solutions, they were able to restore. Maybe they're down for a day. You know, and those losses never get calculated into that. So I happen to think they're probably a lot higher than $2.7 billion. But I don't know, did we? Oh, we're right on time.
Yeah, we're right on time.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming. And